All right, we're going to go ahead and call our workshop to order, and I'd like to declare a quorum of 6 trustees available or in attendance, with a 7th on their way in about an hour or so. Take us to item C1, public comment. And Ms. Horn, do we have any other comments besides the one that I have already? We do not. Okay, so that's going to take us to item D1 of our workshop session, consideration discussion related to 2021 Bond Planning Committee recommendation. And with that said, our public comment is on this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and I will call Caitlin Smith to the front. And while she's coming, I'm just going to give a brief rundown on how the public comment works. How are you, Ms. Caitlin? We're going to get you to come over here to this microphone, and I'm going to tell all these folks about our guidelines for you while you're up there. During this time, public comments are welcome on non-agenda items. Of course, we have an agenda item here. Or Chuck, do I even need to read this since it's an agenda item? Okay, go ahead and do it. The board will listen, but the Open Meetings Act prevents us from responding to speakers. Please complete the note card and give it to the Executive Assistant Clerk to the Board, Ms. Horn. The public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Those needing an interpreter may have up to 6 minutes. Each person has 1 opportunity at the microphone regardless of minutes used. Unused minutes may not be accrued by another speaker. The Executive Assistant, the Clerk to the Board, will time the comments and alert the President when time has expired. The Board asks that those addressing the Board refrain from derogatory comments. So if you could introduce yourself and tell us where you live, and we'd love to hear you.
Do I go with my thing or just, I'm Caitlin. I live in College Station. So, yeah. Okay. Good evening. I'm Caitlin Smith, and I will be an 8th grader at CSMS. I've been an active member of Brazos County 4-H since 3rd grade. This past year, I joined Junior FFA, and I'm looking forward to being an active FFA member in high school. Through 4-H, I have learned so much about agriculture and leadership. Our school's district does not currently have an agriculture or a CTE facility. I feel that many students would benefit tremendously from a district ag facility. An ag facility would not only provide space for students to house livestock projects, it would also provide space for students to do projects for agri-science fairs and non-living and non-livestock projects such as crops and horticulture projects. It would provide a place for class labs to explore live animals or to watch crops grow. An ag facility would also provide a hands-on lab space to evaluate live animals before being slaughtered. This would provide a place for judging teams to practice instead of traveling. There's so many people that don't really understand where their food comes from. An ag facility could provide the opportunities to teach these students about agriculture and show them where their food comes from. A farm-to-table program can not only teach the students where the food comes from, but also provide food for students in need. Some of the food grown can be donated to facilities in need, families in need directly through the school or through the Brazos Valley Food Bank. Instead of elementary classes traveling to other farms or for field trips to learn about animals and crops, they could travel to our district's own facility. This would also give opportunity for older kids to teach younger kids about agriculture and introduce them to the FFA program and opportunities available for them. Through my 4-H experiences, I have traveled to other places and visited other facilities. Each year, East Central FFA hosts a livestock judging contest at their ag facility. This contest is a huge fundraiser for the East Central program. If CSISD were to have their own facility, they could collaborate with Texas A&M in hosting contests and events inviting students from all over the state. There are millions of dollars of scholarships available for FFA students each year. Currently, it is difficult for students in CSISD to be competitive in receiving one of these scholarships because of their SAE's lack in strength and other chapters have throughout the state. By introducing agriculture and FFA to students at an earlier age, they will be able to strengthen their SAEs and be more competitive in scholarships. This past year, the Brazos County Youth Livestock Show raised over $1.1 million at the premium auction and through add-ons. There were 113 CSISD students entered in the show, and combined they received over $313,000. Just think of how many more students would be able to benefit from not just the Brazos County Livestock Show, but all the other major shows if we're a facility for them to raise animals. I'm excited to hear that there is a possibility of CSISD building a new ag facility. These benefits of this are unending. As a student in CSISD, I would love to see our districts build a facility. Tonight, I'm asking you to please give the community of CSISD an opportunity to not only invest in the future of the students of CSISD, but the future of agriculture.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Caitlin. All right, we are still with D1, consideration discussion related to the 2021 Bond Planning Committee recommendation. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent, board members. We have Mr. Ken Hutchins and Melissa Fleming here with us this evening from VLK. They're going to share with us a recommendation from our Bond Planning Committee that has worked as far back as March through the end of May. I do want to make this note that they will be sharing the Bond Committee's recommendation. However, we're not looking for any particular formal action from the board this evening. Whatever action we seek on this recommendation would be at the July meeting. So tonight they're going to share with you that recommendation. It gives you time to process, ask questions, and administration would be seeking action in July. So turning things over to Ken and Melissa.
Thank you, Superintendent Martindale, Board President Nugent, board members, audience. Thank you for having us here tonight. My name is Ken Hutchins, Chief Creative Officer with VLK Architects. And with me somewhere is Melissa Fleming, who is Principal of VLK Architects and for all of our projects at College Station ISD. We're going to walk you through some of the work and that the committee did. We're going to recognize the committee as well. And then also we're going to just give you the recommendation, what is contained in it, a brief synopsis of each project item, and then an outline of the schedule of what goes forward from here. If the board chooses to go through with calling a bond election, you do have a copy of the PowerPoint at your desk, so you can follow along that way as well. So our agenda to this evening is acknowledging the committee members, the committee methodology that they use to arrive at this work, the committee recommendation, next steps, and then any questions obviously from the board. Here are our committee members that were present during the committee work. There were 5 meetings that lasted 2 hours each. As Mr. Martindale will tell you, we started on time and ended on time, and that was just about our #1 charge from the district administration. I'd like to ask that any folks that were on the committee that are here this evening, if you could raise your hand or stand, we'd like to acknowledge you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So their methodology is first they were charged by the board of the administration to do their work, which was the purpose of the 2021 Bond Planning Committee was to review CSISD's needs for a bond referendum, support the district in areas including but not limited to facility renovations, deferred maintenance, buses, fine arts, land acquisition, technology, and other potential capital needs. And so this was the framework of their decision making as they went forward. We always reviewed this at the start of each meeting to make sure that we framed their work and kept them focused. We did have a 2-week break between each of the meetings, so we always brought them back to the task by using the district's charge to the committee. During this time, they heard from district experts on these 8 categories, which were safety and security, deferred maintenance, career and technology education, the fine arts, athletics, district technology, district transportation, and what the district currently holds for land that is currently owned for future projects and the potential need for land for future projects to support district growth. As they did their work and they received the information from the district experts as well as VLK architects, everything was framed around these priority rankings and the definitions that you see here. Priority ranking 1 was the most urgent. These are needs that need to be taken care of as soon as possible with funding from a potential bond election. And then it goes down to item 4, which is, well, it would be nice to have, but it's not urgent need now. And not having these items does not hurt the district and its ability to educate students for them to be successful each day in the classroom. So now the recommendation. So the CSISD 2021 Bond Planning Committee is recommending projects totaling $83,154,318. This will not increase the district's tax rate. If you remember seeing priority 1 through 4s, the committee approved projects in priority 1 that totaled just over $46 million, almost bumping $47 million. Priority 2 projects totaling $23,708 and change, and priority 3 projects totaling $12,005,000 and change. And so these were the 3 categories that those projects fell within. You can see here, this is their recommendation based on one, by the campus, and then also by whether it's a part of the general proposition in the bond election, a technology proposition, or an athletics proposition. You can see there would be actually 2 athletics propositions, one for natatorium and then other for stadiums and seating over 1,000, and we're going to go into details on that. But you can see all the numbers here and where they fall in. You can see the 83,154,318. When voters, if you decide to call a bond election and voters go to the poll, they will see different referendums, and one will be a general proposition in the amount of $70,627,197. They'll see a technology proposition in $4,523,184, a proposition in athletics for natatorium renovations of $2,969,270, and then athletics in stadiums over 1,000 seats of $5,034,667. That's what they would see on election day when they go into the polls. Here you can see all the priority 1 projects, and the first thing I'll call your attention to, these were all of the priority 1 projects that the committee felt necessary, which were the same ones that the district recommended. They recommended 12 priority 1 projects, and the committee agreed with those recommendations. Not only that, when they did their voting, they were 100% across all 4 tables in the room. So these were unanimous votes by the tables to add these to the proposition. I'm just going to give you some brief highlights of these to give you a feel for them and what's contained in them. And I'm going to read from the little cheat sheet that Melissa has prepared. Safety and security, I'm not going into a whole lot of that due to safety and security, but it's district-wide, affecting all buildings across the campus. Cameras, bollards, security vestibules spread about different campuses. A&M Consolidated High School will have some interior renovations. Every restroom in the building will be renovated. The flooring will be changed out, painting throughout the building, new signage, new casework, doors. There will be ceiling improvements, upgrades to the orchestra and band halls, as well as renovation of the auditorium. At Southwood Valley Elementary School, all the interior finishes will be upgraded. There'll be a reconfigured office area and improvements in site drainage and site concrete work. Pebble Creek Elementary School interior finishes, upgrade, and renovation of the old office area into pull-out spaces that are needed. Right now they have to either use full classrooms, which take away from their ability to host more students in that class, or they find other spaces. HVAC replacements at College Station Middle School, A&M Consolidated Middle School, and Forest Ridge Elementary School. Various pieces of equipment need to be replaced there at those campuses. Under a category of roofs and general repairs, there need to be student drop-off canopies added to or extended at Rock Prairie and College Hills. There's some foundation repairs at Oakwood Intermediate. There are roof repairs, also AMCMS cafeteria serving line renovation, as well as track resurfacing, replacement, and striping. For a district-wide CTE affecting the 2 high schools, A&M Consolidated High School will get CTE equipment and renovation of the greenhouse, a construction covered area, culinary lab upgrades, expand the ag mechanic lab upgrades, and welding machines and plasma table. College Station High School would receive greenhouse repair and the same construction covered area as A&M Consolidated High School. In the first of the fine arts proposals, because there's some in priority 1 and priority 2, this first one includes musical instrument and equipment replacement and expansion at the high schools, middle schools, and intermediate schools. So they're both replacing existing instruments and adding to, due to the fact of the new students coming in and adding to the program and needing new instruments for those students. Technology AV, there's several different technology proposed projects throughout the recommendation of the committee. This first one is district-wide AV upgrades. The second is a technology infrastructure that's just over $11 million. It's district-wide infrastructure upgrades. It's the backbone of your system, firewalls, filters, server upgrades, and then also technology for personal devices. And this is student and teacher devices across the district. And then transportation, there needs to be 24 new buses. And for those buses to be parked out the main transportation facility, there needs an additional concrete paving area. So those were all the priority 1 projects that were agreed to and approved by the committee. And those total $46,924,146. Priority 2, you can see now up on the screen, they total $23,708,054. There were only 2 of these that did not receive 100% approval of the tables, but they are still on there due to the fact that they received 3 out of the 4 votes of the table. And so that begins with Cypress Grove Intermediate School, interior finish upgrades throughout the campus, HVAC replacements across the district-wide. For various schools, the district has gone through and created a list along with our consultants of various pieces of mechanical equipment across the district that need to be replaced. That would be included in that. LED lighting to replace the existing fluorescent lighting at Southwood Valley Elementary School, Pebble Creek Elementary School, Rock Prairie, Creekview, and Oakwood Intermediate. Playgrounds, district-wide playground poured in place rubber fall zone. That's just over $562,000. And then site improvements at various campuses across the district, including Rock Prairie driver queuing driveway, Forest Ridge site renovations and drainage, Oakwood front driveway and signage upgrade, and Creekview foundation repair and site concrete work on that site. Athletics sound systems, sound system upgrades at A&M Consolidated High School and College Station High School football stadiums. Athletics natatorium is natatorium renovations to the district natatorium to replace the plaster and tile, address exposed steel corrosion, paint the locker room finish upgrades, and replacement of lighting and other equipment, including ventilation systems at the district natatorium. Fine arts is another fine arts that was in priority 2, which built upon the one that was in priority 1. And it's additional musical instruments and equipment replacement and expansion. So when the fine arts did their assessment, they had a priority 1, which covered a certain number and age of instruments. The committee also listened and heard about the needs for priority 2, and they added that to this, since that's that priority 2. It's just another level of that. Land, you will be growing again in the future, and it's wise for the district to have some money set aside that when the right piece of property becomes available, the district has the funding so they can immediately move and acquire that piece of land for future district growth and be in the best possible position to locate your future schools. And so there's been set aside $3 million for land. Technology AV, the next item there at $253,000 is elementary school AV upgrades. Most of those are in the cafeterias of the elementary schools. And then technology infrastructure, district-wide racks, sensors, upgrades, et cetera, for just over $1 million. And then another proposition for athletics, A&M Consolidated High School press box renovation, which will replace the flooring, the casework, the doors, repaint the walls and door frames, replace HVAC controls, and replace exterior building signage at the A&M Consolidated High School Stadium. And then finally, priority 3 projects. So the recommendation of the committee is for a new district-wide CTE Ag facility for just over $8 million to service the entire district in both high schools, as well as athletics at A&M Consolidated High School Stadium Fieldhouse, the fieldhouse right next door, do an addition to accommodate trainers and treatment of athletes. You'll have a view to the track and field, building renovations to repurpose current training areas and renovate and update finishes throughout. And that's just over $12,522,000 for the priority 3. So that totals up to the overall recommendation of $83,154,318. You can see here in this matrix that every school within the district and district-wide facilities are recommended to receive some type of work and project upgrade by the committee's recommendation. And this matrix highlights this based on what we just covered there. As you move forward in your considerations of the committee's recommendation, there are some important dates to keep in mind. By the state of Texas, the last day to file the election is August 16th, 2021, for November 2nd, 2021 uniform election date. October 18th, 2021 day is the first day of early voting, and October 29th, 2021 is the last day of early voting. And if you have any questions for Melissa and I, we'd be happy to answer those for you.
You said this, Ken, in the beginning, but it's worth repeating that we can accomplish this amount with no increase to our INS tax rate, correct?
Yes, that is information that we have.
Thank you for the presentation. Sorry, I'm in an awkward spot. Quick question on the priorities. If something is slated, let's say at a priority 2, and I guess one of the examples is the land, but land comes available in that first 3 years, are we bound or?
No.
Okay.
No, the prioritization was the ranking of the projects and the needs of each project of the district and ourselves and our consultants at looking at all of your campus buildings.
Okay.
And saying, okay, this air conditioning unit may fail within the next year, so that makes it priority 1.
Okay.
That doesn't mean it has to get done the very first year, although if it's fixing to fail, it should.
Right.
Same way with land. Once the bonds start being sold, you're going to have that money. So obviously, if land become available first 6 months, you could go buy that.
Okay.
Oftentimes, also what Melissa and her team are going to do is they're going to look at a way of packaging these projects. You saw things like technology.
Mm-hmm.
You saw things like HVAC systems and repairs and some roof stuff. It may be best if those are similar pieces of equipment to bundle that into one package and give it to one contractor, and he goes and hits those 6 buildings and does that all at one time, because that gets you the best value for the buck. So once the board has called the bond election, and hopefully the community approves the bond election, then that's one of the first things that will happen is they will go in and start tailoring that work and that package, looking at school calendars, testing dates, winter break, spring break, summer break, trying to package all that and work it together to the best benefits. Because hopefully we would like to create some type of savings out of this as possible and not spend all this money.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you.
I also have a question kind of around the timing and similarly, but like on a priority 3 item that we're saying, or the committee was saying is needed 5+ years out. I mean, is that something we would think we would wait 5 years to do?
So the priority rankings were simply a way to group the projects for the committee to consider. It doesn't, if it's approved as part of the bond, those projections on timing and how they're grouped as priorities doesn't really come into play any longer. That was simply for the committee to be able to work through the different considerations. Does that answer your question, Ken?
I was just going to add that it really was for just decision-making purposes. It's not necessarily binding the project to a certain timeline within the bond. So, yeah, we prioritized in case we found out that, we only had $50 million. We needed to make sure we stayed within that amount. We prioritized projects and so forth. So we were able to get a few more projects in there. We were able to kind of pick and choose from priorities 1, 2, and 3, but it has no bearing on the timeline of the project to actually be produced, bid, or built.
Okay, I appreciate that. And although the language on here, I guess, on the priority says that we won't need it for 5 years. So that's maybe where that is confusing to me.
And why the group ended up being able to consider some things in priority 3, and there are folks in this room on it, is as we get better financial projections, as we began the process, preliminary property values, those types of things, then we were able to increase our projected capacity without adjusting our INS rate. So that really kind of opened it up for the committee to consider some of these other projects as we progressed.
And just again, it sounds like it's not 100% just need that made it a priority 3. It really was just trying to put it in order, is what I hear you guys saying. Okay.
On the CTE facility, is the $8 million include land or just the facility?
So at this point, we don't have what we would call the perfect location for that ag facility. So the plans are right now, if it's approved, that we'll start searching for that particular piece of property, because we certainly don't want to put a multi-million-dollar building in the wrong place. So we will search for some property, and our hope is that, we'll secure that first, and then in the 8.2 million, there'll definitely be enough for the land. And what we might have to do is phase 1 of that, which would be the animal facility, maybe a few classrooms, and then we'll be looking at phase 2 if we have to use the 8 million for land and the facility. If that makes sense. We do have land available, but we're not positive that any of those are the right location for it. So we've made sure that if we could build the facility out in total, we already had the right piece, we could probably finish it out. Otherwise, it may have to be in phases. But we can definitely get the ag facility for the animals and some classrooms and that sort with that funds. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. So I can't say 100% for sure yet, but
Right.
the plans are for both.
Okay, thank you.
So just for clarification, when people go to vote, this is going to be 4 different propositions, correct?
Yes, it's going to be the general proposition, the technology proposition, an athletics proposition that's an auditorium, and that athletics proposition for stadiums that's over 1,000 seats.
Okay. And that's based on new law.
Yes, that's based on the new law of the state of Texas.
So to follow up on that, the stadium greater than 1,000 would all be grouped together? All
Yes.
those are grouped, okay.
Yeah.
And similarly, on the technology though, some technology is under general prop and some is separate. I'm assuming again, following the law, but what does the law tell us to do there?
Okay, so what the law says is under technology, it's personal devices must be a separate referendum. So technology that's attached to the building, similar to these projectors, the infrastructure, the Wi-Fi capabilities, all of that is connected with a building, and so that can be in the general proposition. So really, the separate one are the personal devices. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank y'all. Thank you so much for the entire journey, and it was a journey. One we hope will continue.
Very good.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Strauss, don't go anywhere.
I'm not leaving.
D2, item D2, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2021-22 budget. Mr. Martindale.
Yes, sir. As you mentioned, Ms. Strauss don't go anywhere for several different agenda items, but Ms. Strauss is here to provide us with our most current 21-22 budget projections. Now that we have clarity on school finance calculations from our most recent legislative session. So, Ms. Strauss?
Thank you. And I know we've been waiting a long time for this. Legislative session puts a delay to things, but they did complete the session on May 31st, so we quickly started working right after that. So tonight, I'm going to give you a brief summary of some of the things in the 87th legislative session and that affected College Station ISD. We're going to go over 21-22 preliminary information. We've got some compensation to go over with you, debt service overview, and then the other information, I don't plan on spending a lot of time on that, but we'll certainly go over it if you like. But those things have all been covered with you in the past 2 months. Workshops, and they haven't changed at this point. So I did put them in there for reference, so you don't have to look back. You can find them all within this one presentation. So the 87th legislative session. The big bill for me was House Bill 1525, and that's what they called the House Bill 3 school funding cleanup bill. They did some things, adjusted the state funding from the last biennium. So one of the things that positively impact College Station ISD was they reinstated what's called the gifted and talented funding source. So we had this prior to House Bill 3. did not have this funding source for the last 2 years, but of course the requirement to serve gifted and talented never went away. So in this scenario, we benefited by about $284,000 above that of what House Bill 3 would have been if we had stayed in place the way it was. They also modified the career and technology allotment, basically the weights for courses. They're looking for courses that go in a sequence and that keep kids in the program for more than 1 year or a semester. And so in this particular instance, at least for the coming year, this one negatively impacted College Station ISD compared to what House Bill 3 had. And we're estimating at this point about $250,000. It's hard to tell until we actually get all the kids in place and in the courses and actually see it and calculate it, but our estimates are about $250,000 negative impact. Then the big one for College Station ISD is the fast growth allotment. They made some changes in this. Now last year, College Station, we did not have fast growth allotment. We didn't qualify, but under the next coming year, we would qualify. So under old law, and this is a big number, under old law, we would have received $3.2 million plus some change. Under the new law, that amount for College Station is in your projections, you'll see later, at $348,000. So again, we didn't have this revenue last year, but I consider it a lost opportunity of about $2.9 million. So the big change they did here was before they looked at percentages and they ranked schools in percentages. Now what they're going to do is look back 6 years and see how much district grew, and you must grow more than 250 students. So it did drop a lot of districts out. Now, one thing they did here to ensure, some of your smaller districts that have been in that percentage growth before, they did have a grandfathering clause or a hold harmless. So if districts had qualified last year, they'll still get at least a little bit of funds. But since we didn't have it in the prior year, we're not going to be held harmless to that. This fast growth allotment, along with the gifted and talented allotment, they both have a state limit on how much they're going to pay out. So if it exceeds that amount, all districts will be prorated down a little bit in their funding. So we hope that doesn't happen. So that to me was what I call the biggest loser. So then we have the tax compression rate. We've talked about this in the last couple of workshops and all the last biennium. So the way House Bill 3 works is as our property values grow, then our tax rate comes down accordingly. And it's based on some state average growth rates as well as the individual district. So at the last minute, they changed some numbers on us a little bit. So I was communicating that there was no required tax rate decline if we had anything less than 2.5%. Well, at the very end, when they looked at state averages, now they're saying all districts with a property value growth of 2.8% or less are still going to have a very slight decline in their M&O tax rate. So that's what this chart tries to show you. So if, for instance, College Station ISD had a property value growth rate compared to last year of less than 2.8 cents, our maximum compressed rate, that's before we add any enrichment, is 0.9134 cents. And then College Station, through approvals that you all gave, we have 5 cents added on top of that maximum compressed rate for what we call the enrichment pennies. Enrichment pennies, we get both local tax dollars and we get some state money with these. So the maximum rate would be 0.9634, and we are currently at 0.966. So you can see very slight decline, 0.0026 cents. Would be our mandatory decline. If we grew by 3%, this one is greater than 2.8, and actually you're going to see I use 3% in my projections a little bit later. The maximum compressed rate is 0.9119. Then we have our 5-cent enrichment pennies we're going to add for 0.9619. Compared to our current rate, now it's going to decline by almost a half a cent, 0.004. As our growth, if it gets more than 3%, that's going to compress even more. Okay, so that kind of gives you a perspective on how that works. Any questions? That's a little complicated. So we're going to decline. It's not going to see a lot, but we will. So some other changes in the legislative session that could be of importance to us is they approved $35 million for our winter storm reimbursements. The state has called it Storm Uri. So if you see that in some headlines, that's what it's called, that week of winter storms. We do not know if College Station and ISD is going to benefit from any of these yet or not. $35 million statewide for school districts is not a lot. So we're not real hopeful, but we hope that we will get something out of that. They expanded current law outcomes bonus money, and this is some additional funds on a per student basis that we are eligible for. But this would go for those students, or we get credit for those students that receive an associate's degree within a certain amount of time. So that's going to be very delayed because, of course, they have to get the data. They expanded what we call allowable uses for our state compensatory education funds. That is a very positive thing. What it did is it just gives us some flexibility. We have what we call spend requirements, amounts we have to spend in different categories of funding that we get, and state compensatory ed is one of them. In House Bill 3, they added some things like the early education allotment, and this they qualify for the same things. And so a lot of districts are struggling meeting that requirement because we've had to now spread the required expenditure. So this is a very good thing. It's going to allow us some flexibility in compliance. And the last is it allowed IMA funds, that's instructional material allotment funds that we use for instructional materials and textbooks, to support distance learning. We were not allowed to do that before. So again, that's a little flexibility for us. So now what did not pass? I think everybody by now knows that virtual school funding for next year did not pass. That's for the virtual school like we operated in the prior, that at this point is not funded for next year. We were very pleased to say that they did not require a particular set aside or reserve of our ESSER 3 funds that you'll hear about in a little bit. And they did not pass any fund balance restrictions. So those last two bullets are a very positive thing for all districts. Now, another thing that I wouldn't say didn't pass, but it's more what I call they didn't make a change, and that's to the basic allotment or guaranteed yields. And these are factors in our funding formula that drive how much money we get per student. So we talked about House Bill 3 a while ago. So in House Bill 3, and I don't want to diminish what the state did in the last biennium, they directed a lot of funds to public ed, which was a wonderful thing. But in there, whenever they require districts to compress your tax rate or reduce that tax rate as your property values grow, the only way we're going to get additional money per student is if the state changes one of these two things. They're either going to have to add something in, like the gifted and talented allotment that they did, or they're going to have to increase the basic allotment or the guaranteed yield. And you can see they made no changes. So other than the few things that they tweaked within the formulas, there really isn't additional money on a per student basis. So school districts are really at the mercy of the legislative session to make some changes to their funding formula to gain on a per student basis unless they target some special populations. Questions on legislative session? I just hit some of the high points. There's a lot of other things that affected some areas other than finance and some compliance that we'll be working through, and I'm sure you'll hear about later.
Just what's the guaranteed yield?
It is $6,000. Well, the guaranteed yield is $98.56.
What does that mean? I'm sorry that
Well, it's all part of a huge formula, and so I'd have to work through that process with you. It's really, I don't even know how to explain it. So I'd be glad to share it with you, but
Okay, just big picture. I was trying to understand what it represented in that. I mean, I understand the basic allotment, just
Right.
didn't understand those other line item pieces that would,
yeah,
that would be
has
an
to do
additional
with,
to
it has
that.
to do with the tax rates. Remember I said the enrichment pennies, that we get some additional funds for. It's a combination of tax rates and yields.
Okay,
Okay, if that kind of gives you some insight. Okay,
thank you.
sure.
Were there any non-funded mandates that will cost the district money?
That's a good question. And I would say we're still studying that. I'm going to learn a lot about that tomorrow at a workshop that I'm attending, where I will hear a lot more about other than finance. Yeah, I've heard of some small things requirements. I can't tell you if they would cost us a lot. I know we're having to reprint student IDs and stuff like that, but other than, I can't off the top of my head think of any, but I'm sure there are some.
I can't think of any off the top of my head either, Mr. Hall. However, I will mention to you, for example, the fast growth allotment. There are a couple of those things that actually that don't happen to the last week or two of the legislative session, and you get preliminary runs. So when it has such an impact on your bottom line as fast growth allotment did, it doesn't provide much time to advocate one way or the other. Because it happens late. And then we typically get, again, projection runs from different professional organizations to determine how it benefits us. And the fast growth, it benefits some, it hurt others. So, it was a give and take both ways on that
Yeah,
particular
it was
one. But
literally
it happens
the last
late.
10 days on the fast growth allotment before we heard that they were looking at changing it, but before we got estimates for College Station ISD, we were in the last leg of the session. Okay. Okay, so now getting to 21-22 information. So this just gives you a little insight into what the current year, 2020, 2021 look like. Now remember, we are held harmless for our average daily attendance, which did help us. So we budgeted on 13,279. I'm still in estimates. We should be finalizing everything in the next couple of weeks, but estimating that without hold harmless, we would have ended at 12,777, but we're funded at 13,275. So that's what we'll be funded at. And of course, then the weighted average daily attendance takes into account those special populations. Budgeted 16,765, ended at 15,940, or it's estimated at that. We were funded at 16,604. And we have that 0.966 tax rate. Now, I put this in there as a baseline because when we talk about what is our growth going to be, we have to go off of where I think we're going to end this year and not our hold harmless. So you've got 3 different scenarios. Scenario 3 is the one highlighted because that's the one that we feel like we can use for estimates at this point. But I also want to show you so you can see that tax rate differential. So in both 1 and 2, we use a 2.5% student growth, and in 2, a 3.9, which is what our demographer has estimated. And we have 2.69, which property value growth, which is where our first preliminary information came from the appraisal district. But you can see we've got that mandatory slight decline in the property tax rate for 0.9634. In the third scenario, we increased the property value growth to 3% instead of 2.69. So our ADA goes up slightly, and then you can see that tax rate comes down a little bit more because now we're above that 2.8 threshold before the additional local compression comes in. But scenario 3 is the one that we're going to use for funding purposes at this point. So now looking at general fund revenue, again, I've provided you with the first 2 scenarios just so that you can see kind of what happens with the property tax rates. And we're going to compare our estimated revenue to what you originally budgeted, not where I think we're going to end up, because that's my baseline. So scenario 3 with that 3% enrollment growth and 3% property value growth, it's about $596,000, right around $600,000 less than we budgeted for in 2021. A big thing is that interest earnings right there. We budgeted last year $700,000. We're not going to get there, and I don't anticipate any improvement in the earnings rates for next year. So that's a big hit for us and for all districts. We'll benefit on the debt side, and we are when we refunded some bonds, but we're definitely paying the price here on the revenue side. So this is where you can see that fast growth allotment. Had we been able to receive that, there's only about $350,000 factored in here, and it would have been a lot more, $2.9 million more, had the old law been in place. Okay, so before we get to total expenditures or where we're estimating at this point, I want to spend a little bit of time on compensation, because compensation is compensation and benefits 80 to 85% of our budget. So that's where our dollars are spent. College Station ISD contracts with the Texas Association of School Boards, their HR services department, to assist the district in comparing College Station ISD, our salaries and our benefits, to that of what we call our market peers. Market peers are who we compete with, either instructionally or for the different groups of employees. And they make recommendations to us in order to help us in recruiting and retaining highly qualified staff. So we appreciate their work. It's very valuable to what we do. So just in summary, their review of our teacher compensation compared College Station to 14 market peer districts. And in their comparison, what they've noticed, and I don't think this is new information, this is similar to what we shared last year, and that is our pay is lowest to market, those 14, at years 5 and 10 in our salary schedule. We were at 91% of that median of the 14 districts. And we're closest to market at year 20 at 97%. That's very good. When you're looking at over 14 districts, you can get within 3 percentage points. That's great. College Station ISD, we're fortunate. We have more experience on average than districts statewide, not just the 14, they go with the state. Our average is 13, where statewide is 12. And we have 54% of our teachers with more than 10 years of experience. And lastly, looking at last year, we have about 1,033 total teachers, and we hired 138 new to College Station ISD for last year. That doesn't necessarily mean they had zero experience or new to the teaching industry, but they were new to College Station. So now moving on to our administrative professional pay group. This one we compare, instead of to those 14 peers, we're comparing to statewide school districts with similar enrollment, because when we start recruiting for these individuals, we're normally probably going outside of those 14 districts. So they looked at what we call our pay structure. This is whenever we recruit someone, we look at our pay structure based on experience. That's where we place them. So for our central administration, our pay structure midpoints are 3% below that statewide market. For campus administration, we're 1% below that midpoint. And for our professional pay structure, we are 1% below again. So overall, I think this is we're in a good place here on our pay structure. Now for our paraprofessionals, again, now we're comparing back to our peer groups, our 14, but they also include what we call non-school sources from the greater Houston metro area. So we're not just looking at Bryan-College Station, we're expanding all the way to the Houston area for this comparison market. So for our clerical and technical pay structure, we're 1% above. And in this one, because a lot of these are hourly employees, we're also looking at what we call our pay minimum. Someone comes in brand new with no experience in that particular area, Doesn't have to be in College Station or in a school district, but we're looking at industry too. Our pay minimum is 1% below. So we're 1% above in the midpoint and 1% below, which probably means our span is for the minimums and maximums a little larger than what some of them do. And then we have our instructional support category within there, and our midpoint is 6% above that market, and our minimum is 3% above. So we're doing good in that category. And then our last group is the auxiliary, and again, compared to the same groups as our paraprofessionals. And this one, our auxiliaries, our midpoints are 4% above, and our minimums are 1% above. These are maintenance, custodial, bus drivers, that food service workers, that group. And one thing of note is in this particular area, we made some sizable gains to market compared to last year on our average pay. A lot of this has to do with transportation. If you'll remember, we were a little more aggressive with that group because the immediate area was paying better than us, and so we upped that a little bit more. So that's the reason we were able to make those sizable gains there, so that's a positive. So now looking at preliminary compensation and benefit costs. So looking at the teacher, librarian, and registered nurse category, those are the ones typically on the salary schedule. Our current beginning pay for this group with no experience is $45,500. If we increase that by $1,000 to $46,500 and looked at ensuring as each teacher advances a year in experience, that as they move from, let's say, year 5 to 6 years experience or 6 to 7, that they would receive at least $1,000 in pay increase from gross pay the current year to gross pay next year. That's going to cost us a little over $1 million, $1,037,000 are my estimates. When you look at each of these teachers and as they advance a step and you compare it to the teacher midpoint, it would ranges depending on where they're at in the schedule, 1.66 to 2.85%, depending on where they are. And the average across the board is 1.92%. So close to, just shy of, on average, less than a 2% increase. On all the other pay groups, if we did a 1% of pay range midpoint, the estimated cost for administrative is just under $190,000. For clerical and paraprofessional, $140,500, and for auxiliary, $132,900. So to do that average of 1.92 in the teacher salary schedule and 1% across the board, the estimated amount is $1.5 million. Then we add a percentage for district share of TRS and Medicare, so that's about $85,000. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about healthcare insurance. That's got a tremendous increase this year. And so on average, we're going to see that in a minute, it's about a 6% increase. So if we did some shared processes, we haven't worked all the way through that, but share that increase between the district and employees, that's an estimated $316,000 to the district. So this particular compensation plan, if we move forward with that, about $1.9 million. So big number, but it's a very important group of employees and a very important part of our budget.
Can I ask a question here on this one? What if I see that number is with the shared with the employee. Do you know the cost of what it would be if we did not share the cost with the employee?
You're about 2 slides ahead of me.
All right.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about our teachers because that's our biggest group and the ones that impact instruction the most. So looking at our teacher salaries to our market peers, we talked about this last year. So I want to point out in 1920, when we started this budget process, we told you in years 0 and 5 was where we were the farthest from market. We were at that 90 percentile. So we made a concerted effort when we looked at their compensation plan to address those two. So of course, I didn't have 2021 data for all the other districts. So all we could do was compare it to the data we had. And so what we proposed would have improved us a little bit more, but now that we have 2021 data, we accomplished what we set out to do. Of course, we would have liked to have closed the gap a little bit more, but you can see at 0 years, we went from 90 percentile to that peer median to 92. I believe whenever I compared it before, we were at about 93, so ended up at 92, so that's good. On the 5-year, we went from 90 to 91. The yellow is neutral. We stayed the same. And the one red one, we fell from 94 to 93%. A lot of that is because we were so focused on that beginning year trying to get some improvements, because that's where we normally recruit most of our employees, is in that category. So again, looking at 21-22, if we use the preliminary compensation plan that I proposed or presented to you, and we compare it to the current year peer medians, 0 would be 94%. 5-year, we'd also improve to 92. We improve at 10-year at 93, 15, 94, and 20 years would remain the same. Now, again, we won't know exactly where we fall out until we see what all the other districts are doing. But again, we're trying to make progress in that 0 and 5 years where we're furthest from market. And really that 10 years is right there as well. So we're trying to make some progress in those categories. So now we're going to talk about that insurance amount. So this is from TRS. We have no control over this. So TRS published their rates for next year about 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks. So you can see that in the chart, where I said the average was 6%, some of them are going up over 8%, depending on the plan design that they're under, as well as the group, whether that be employee, employee spouse, employee children, or family. So you can see the ones in red, those actually had a decline. That's an HMO category, and that's what's driving that average down to 6%, even though you see some in the 8s, 7.95, 7.97. So this is huge. The other thing is that historically, College Station ISD has offered our employees an employee-only plan at no cost to the employee. It's going to be very difficult to do with these kinds of increases. So looking at if employee only under the active care primary increased by $31, if we applied that and we funded that part ourselves across all plans, so we would increase everybody, you're talking about just under $700,000 to the district. $683,000 is what it would cost. So that's where I estimated if somehow we could split that difference with the employee, that would be in the 300,000s on the compensation plan. It's just getting harder and harder to be able to fund a plan at 100%. So I think that's real important to note.
What percentage use that plan of the employees? Just out of curiosity.
Well,
and I know you offer it. I mean,
right.
Never mind.
Well, we have, I don't have the percentage, and I can certainly get it. I know when we looked at how many were on the plan, about 1,700 total are on our plan, and we have over 2,000 employees.
It's a good percentage.
Yeah. A lot are in that employee-only category because these rates are so expensive. They're looking elsewhere for family if they need to, or maybe their spouse has can offer coverage for the rest of the family. I wish I had better news on this one. It's something that's out of our control. Okay, so now looking at some totals. So estimated revenue under that 3% growth model for both enrollment and property values, $122,487,000. So last year, this is kind of our base. We start with appropriations of $125.7 million. We've added some positions, 2 pre-K instructional aides, 2 special ed teachers, and 3 special ed instructional aides, for a total of $250,750. Compensation and benefits that we just discussed at $1.9 million, and then other increases, property and casualty insurance, regional day school for the deaf, utilities, and our school resource officers, $418,665. So when we add that up, that net expenditures or appropriations over revenue is $5.8 million. But looking at if we use ESSER funds to assist us for next year in the budget to the tune of about $3 million, we're looking at the net impact after ESSER or the stimulus funds that you'll hear about in the next presentation of $2.8 million. I want to talk a little bit about what I call budget reallocations, because you don't see any budget reductions there, but we have been very busy in looking at particularly staffing and how we can be more efficient with that. And so what we've done is some areas have declined, allowing us to reallocate those positions into other areas. And so without that process, we would be asking for additional positions. So we've been able to reallocate some what we call full-time equivalents or positions, and fund Cardonics. That's the software that's helping us with all of this scheduling and efficiency. And we've been able to fund 3 career tech positions. That's 2 ag teachers, a half ag science. They're currently there, but moving them from a half to full-time, and a half health science. And if you'll remember, these courses get a little higher funding than a regular ed classroom. So that's a positive. And also fund 5 more special ed instructional assistants above those that I talked about that were a budget addition. So we do have some things that we have been able to reduce, but we've had to reallocate it into some other areas. So I think it's worth noting that we are trying very hard to work within the positions that we have. So, of course, when we talk about that $2.8 million, the only place it's going to come from is fund balance. So I wanted to go over that a little bit. In total, we're at $36.1 million right now. And in the supplementary material, what I've told you before, estimated $2.6 million appropriations over revenue for the current year. So if that holds, we'd be looking at $33.5 million fund balance in total. TEA is looking at that assigned and unassigned mainly, because that's what's available for any purpose without coming to the board and asking for permission. So they're going to look at that. So one thing we're looking at also is how would this affect our financial rating? Because we know we got $33.5 million. So we want to make sure that we get the highest rating possible, because that's definitely very good for a district of our size. So the first rating says that in order to get all of our points in there, we need either 75 days of operating expenditures in that assigned and unassigned area, or that our fund balance change is less than 25%. So I've estimated, or Mr. Lasser and I have both worked on this, and that unassigned assigned is about at 62 days, but we're going to be well under that 25% change in fund balance. So should still get our points. We also have the option, and we did this last year, of looking at these commitments, construction and other, of $12 million, and asking you to move that to unassigned. Those amounts have been there since 2011, so a very long time. We have not utilized them. It was done then because funding bills then encouraged us to do so. So we have that option as well to increase that unassigned to get closer to that 75 days. I also bring this up because fund balance is like your savings account, so you don't like to dip into it. But there are reasons that a district would. Some reasons might be a one-time expenditure. You've built it up. Now we need to make some one-time expenditures, things that don't reoccur year after year. So we utilize it once, pull it out of savings, get what you need, and kind of reset the bar and move from there. The other reason I think you use fund balance is a year such as this. So we don't want to make massive budget reductions that could impact instruction when we don't know what the legislature is going to do. So now we're talking about June, we finally have the results, but we're already gearing up for next school year. So we don't want to make rash decisions quickly that could negatively impact instruction. So I feel like when you have a healthy fund balance, a very good use is for us to take that year when this happens and think through these efficiencies and budget things that we could do and make sure we're making wise decisions with that, things that have the least negative impact on instruction in the classroom. So that's kind of where we're at in this scenario, is we have a very healthy fund balance, and we need some time to think through the next couple of years and what changes we might want to make, if that makes sense. So get us through that.
So Amy, if you go back real quick, okay, so if you look at the unassigned, the 20 million, and you consider the first rating, the financial integrity rating, this is where you're saying, and we would have 62 days of operating in our fund balance.
Yes.
If you use the 20 million of unassigned, and
Yes.
it has to be designated as, it has to be unassigned to be calculated in the first rating.
Or assigned, but that's a very small number.
In the committed, that was done, as you mentioned, in 2011, when there was talk that the state may come in and help themselves to unassigned
Or
fund
unassigned,
balances
yes.
some years ago. So I think it was a wise decision at that point in time to assign some of those monies in case that occurred. But that's far beyond us at this point.
Yes.
So something that we could consider through the course of the fall, and you touched on this, is where we have $12 million committed under construction and other, is we could, with board action, unassign those funds and raise that unassigned value from 20 million to 32, correct?
Yes.
Which I believe, if my calculations are right, would put us to the, I don't know, in the 90s as
Yes.
far as operational days.
Yeah, it would put us
correct?
way over the 75.
90 to
I don't have
100
a
days.
calculation.
So I prefer to look at it that way.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
All right,
certainly
I just
an
wanted to
option.
bring that point up.
And if we choose to do that, that would need to be brought to you before the close of this fiscal year. Because after August 31, that year is basically closed. So if we decide to do that, it would be brought to you before August 31 for approval. And it takes the board action to do that. So I would be selling everybody short, and if I don't address, what are we going to do about this deficit? How are we going to address it? Okay, so in the school funding formula, the first year of the biennium is always lower than the second year of the biennium. They do this to fund the instructional materials allotment because they give districts a full 2 years of their instructional material allotment all up front. So in looking at the calculations and the formulas and looking ahead, which I'll provide a little more information at the next meeting on the future years, but with the same student data, no growth in students, and which we know that's not likely to happen, and 2% property value increase, the additional revenue to College Station ISD would be $2.6 million. So looking ahead to the second year of the biennium, we have some additional resources available there. We also, and we keep saying the pandemic and COVID and what it caused to the district. So we have some unknowns about where our enrollment and our average daily attendance will be. And so we would be looking at adjusting our revenue should it come in at better than 3%. We may even improve it before we bring a final budget, depending on registrations and all that we get. But looking at that in the early fall, and if enrollment is better than that 3% increase that I used in our scenario, we can bring a budget amendment to you, increasing revenue, and we have that choice of either offsetting that final 2.8 million in the scenario I gave you, or decreasing the impact on the federal stimulus monies that we would use. So we'll be looking at that. There are some ESSER 2 funds available. We don't know how much yet. It's in the $5 million range total, but there's going to be some offsets that I'll explain later. So we don't know how much that is going to be, but we have those funds to use. The requirement to spend those will be earlier than the ESSER 3. We're going to monitor the fast growth allotment and how College Station might be affected depending on where our enrollment goes. And we're going to continue throughout all of next year working on staffing efficiencies. We'll start in the fall, actually looking and projecting out what we could do as the spring comes around. So those are some of the plans we have to address that deficit. So I'm going to move on to debt service, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So you heard about the bond referendum and the bond committee's work. So for 21-22, the debt service fund at that current 26.3 cents. Currently, our scheduled debt payment, so this is exclusive of any bond referendum, is a little over $26 million. So at this current tax rate, we feel like we can take advantage of what's called an early redemption. So once bonds have been at least outstanding for 10 years, depending on how the bond was worded, we can refinance them, which we did this past year, took advantage of lower interest rates and restructured them, or we can pay them off early. So we did kind of a combination for 21-22. And at this current rate, I think we can do early redemption of $3.2 million, somewhere in that range, stay at our current tax rate, and in the long term, it will save interest expense for the district and our taxpayers. So we're going to pay off some of those higher rate bonds that are outstanding and eligible and get them off the books. So that's factored into there. And then I briefly said some other information, which I can certainly go over, but this none of this is new. You've got information on our current tax rate and our tax values, our enrollment and average daily attendance. These are the current year revenue and expenditure projections all the way out to August, and our budget timeline. So I'll open it up to any further questions you may have. Speechless.
This is an easy one, hopefully, because we've seen it a couple of times. On the enrollment, way back at actually the beginning of your presentation, I just wanted to see that table that had the numbers.
This one?
Yeah. So every scenario is certainly more than what we're ending this year with, but all less potentially than what we budgeted for.
Yes, because you remember we budgeted at 13,279 and we didn't hit there. So when you go look at our the next slide, our estimated revenues, we didn't make budget this year either in revenues. But for comparison purposes, we're going to look for what's on the books as budget to budget.
And I guess I was just thinking of that as you went through some of the staffing discussions and just trying to understand where we would be compared to where we are today, and as far as like how many people we actually have to go out and hire. You know.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't have to, as far as hiring, if you look right here, we budgeted for 13,279, and at 3%, it's going to take 3.9% to get back to that, because we had about a 1.5% decline. So we're going to make that up plus. So it's going to take 3.9% to get back to that 13,279. So that's a lot of reasons why we're not having to add a lot of general ed staff. We're doing, if you recall, we are adding 2 pre-K assistants because we feel like we're going to have to add at least 2 pre-K classrooms across the district. So where are we going to get the teachers? Again, that was that reallocation. So we looked at elementary all on its own, and where we feel like we can reduce based on the 22-to-1, we reallocated it to pre-K. So that's a lot of those reallocations again. So it's going to take about 3.9 to get us to where we budgeted for this year. That's a pretty good growth to look at for 1 year.
And obviously there'll be some hiring because of just attrition, but you're saying just not
hiring, but
adding the new
additional
position.
numbers of teachers. Yes.
I'm trying to be super optimistic. The demographer is, they were ballparking 3.9
Yes.
for growth. Okay. So if we had the 3.9 for growth and the 3% property value growth, what, is there any way of knowing off the top of your head?
Well, now remember, I've said as property values grow, your tax rate compresses.
that's right.
And
So there we go.
you're going to have the state
Mr.
revenue
Nugent?
you
I see
had. We're not going to get any more.
Yeah.
We're not going to get any more local. revenue.
In past years, without the compression on the M&O rate, what helped us tremendously in College Station was our property value growth. And that's typically what kind of pulled us out of the hole. It absolutely by no means was any contributions through the state funding. We were a self-funded school district to the point that they took some from us. So regardless of the property values at that compression rate, it's just going to push the M&O down. You're not going to collect. It's not going to allow you to collect a lot more additional local property tax.
You can look at this.
If you go the 3 to 3.9, increasing the ADA, yes, that helps, but it don't give us
And
a whole lot
this
better.
screen right here actually kind of shows you that. So scenario 2 at the 3.9 is going to bring us about $125,000 more revenue from the 3. And we're not going to gain, any additional property tax if it grows above 3. So basically that 596, you could take 125,000 off. Math becomes easy when they flatten that one category.
I have a comment and a question. My question's more on the ESSER funds and that 3 million that's on there. And I know that's next kind of agenda, so it may be covered in there. I guess, obviously it's great that we're going to have that money to be able to use, and help what would be potentially 5.8 million in a deficit. But what I want to understand is, is it, the way it's presented, it looks like it's just helping us cover our expenses next year. Or how, as opposed to what I believe is intended for, right, is to help with real COVID expenses that happened in the past. So I guess I need an understanding of how that 3 million covers expensive, if that makes sense. Okay.
So we can use ESSER funds to do what they call supplant the general fund. And normally federal funds, you can't fund in the federal category something you previously funded in the general fund. And that's not the rules of these stimulus funds. So certainly legal to do that. We haven't quite identified exactly which ones we would do, but there are staffing, there's supplies, there's software, there's a number of things. And when we actually, if this goes through as presented today, instead of just saying an offset, we would actually have to take those expenditures and recode them to this federal program. So instead of it being like an other revenue and an offset, you would actually have a reduction in expenditures in the general fund, is how it would be recorded. But trying to be transparent here and how we're getting closer to a balanced budget, I presented it this way. But certainly it's a legal expenditure. In fact, that's the very thing that the legislature was trying to do when they were trying to mandate a percentage.
Well, and I certainly wasn't questioning the legality. I was just more, are we really doing the things we need to do to cover some of the learning loss and all the other issues that we may have had because of
When we get to that slide, we can show you some things. We're still in the budget development stage of that, but with 12.8 million plus anything we might get with ESSER 2, we will be able to still address those learning loss issues.
do both. Yeah. Yes. Good.
Will you go to the total slide? what was important to me was, well, we can utilize ESSER funds through 23 or 24.
Through September 2024.
Okay. So they're not going away immediately, but we have to be wise how we spend it, and is it a reoccurring cost, and how do we account for it in the future? So when we looked at the 3 million here, what I thought was important is, okay, what not 21, 22, but what about 22, 23? And that was the reason Amy put the next slide, this next slide in. To show all of you that 22, 23, the available school fund is going up 2.6 million. So you kind of have the 3 million of ESSER funds you're utilizing in the 21, 22 coming back around through the state funds in 22, 23. The second year of the biennium, there's always more state revenue than the first year, because she kind of mentioned it, but in the first year of the biennium, they withhold $2 to $3 million for instructional materials allotment. So when we buy different things and y'all approving it's from the IMA fund, those are state funds that have been withheld that first year of the biennium. The second year, they're not withholding, and we receive those funds. So what was important to me is, how do I account for that the next year? And so that helps us close that gap. And in addition to this, she's using 2% property value increase, which again, at 2.5 or whatever is going to compress, but there's no growth at all on the student data. So if we recognize any student growth, that will just increase the revenue side as well. So just a little side note, lots of information. It's important to process. Not the prettiest picture, but one that we can manage nonetheless.
I will make my comment. It's more on your chart with your market comparison for the compensation, which I loved. I loved the chart. It was great. Because I think it has been, we talked about it last year. I don't like to see us so many percentages behind in those comparisons. I don't need to see us ahead of those comparisons, but we do need to I feel like we need to be compensating our teachers comparably, in the market. So I think the proposal on that side of it seems to make a nice improvement there. So.
Any other questions?
All right.
Mr. Horak, if you can just catch Mr. Ben up later on the budget.
I was going to say, Mr. Ben, do you have any questions?
I promise you do. I promise. All right. Well,
Thank you.
hold
I'll
on.
stay.
Do you need some water or anything?
I've got one.
Okay. It's going to go to D3, consideration and discussion regarding said elementary and secondary school emergency relief, or ESSER funding and possible uses. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. I don't think this one will be quite as long,
I
but
hope not.
important either way. Ms. Strauss is going to give us insight into ESSER 1, 2, and 3 federal funds, in particular the timeline and grant application process necessary to assess the ESSER 3 funds. I do want to mention this, and she'll share with the board this toward the end of her presentation, but she will mention the possibility of a one-time retention payment for all of our returning employees. There isn't any action we're seeking this evening. She's going to share that information with you. That is something I do anticipate asking board approval for at the July meeting. So, Ms. Strauss.
Thank you, Mr. Martindale. So again, as mentioned, we're going to cover a little information on all 3 stimulus funds that were available to the district, how we use them or can use them, and some of the details. So this chart shows you the 3 different stimulus funds, or ESSER 1, 2, and 3, to simplify things, that's available to the district or has been made available to the district, and kind of compares them. So ESSER 1 is what came in the 1920 fiscal year, and it was $1.4 million for College Station ISD, but they basically fully supplanted these funds. That is what they used because they basically held districts harmless after that March date when no one came back to school and didn't penalize us for that lower attendance rate in the virtual world that we had to live in for a few months. So they sent us $1.4 million and they reduced our state aid by $1.4 million. The intent was then that we would also offset those expenditures. So they send us the revenue, we have to record it differently. So we had the option of reclassifying up to $1.4 million of expenditures as well. What we chose to do, and thanks to the board, is we did not offset everything in 1920 like we could have. We anticipated this current year was going to be even more difficult than 1920. So we held about $1.1 million. I'm sorry, that's bothering me too. It's flashing on that side, but not on this side. $1.1 million into this year to help us out, and we have used it. And I'm going to show you how we used it. But please realize there really wasn't any additional revenue. The use was just basically how we reallocated what could have been general fund expenditures. But we have until September 2022 to finalize out those funds. ESSER 2 is what was announced a couple of weeks ago. For College Station ISD, it's a little over $5.7 million. Again, they are going to reduce this. They're going to supplant. The intent is that they will offset this $5.7 million by however much it costs the state to use that hold harmless average daily attendance by. Okay. They promise that no district will be in excess where we have to pay back. But we do not know how much this is going to be yet because the final data for all of last year is still going into the PEMS and being submitted. So we hope to know in a couple of weeks. Based on our estimates, that hold harmless, the state did not expend more than $5.7 million. So we feel like we will have some benefit here. We just don't know how much. But the deadline for that is September 2023. So we would be have to utilize these funds faster. And then we have, I keep thinking I'm doing something wrong. Okay. So then we have ESSER 3 funds, and this is, of course, the largest amount of money, $12.8 million. There is no set aside and no supplanting on this. So the district will get these $12.8 million. We can use them to supplant what the general fund has been doing or reimburse. You can see it goes back to March of 2020. So if there's expenditures we still would like to reimburse the general fund for that we didn't do in ESSER 1, we can still do that. So again, ESSER 1 really not an increase, although we were able to take advantage of it and how the timing of it and help us out current year. ESSER 2, don't know yet, and ESSER 3 is the one we are in application process right now. So we talked about that ESSER 1 just to kind of let you know what we did offset general fund for. We reimbursed the food service department. That was for last year because they experienced some losses that would have put them in what we call a negative fund balance state, and we didn't want to do that. So we reimbursed them some. We used it for COVID-19, either reimbursing the general fund or for additional COVID-19 related expenditures, which included some teaching units, technology, extra duty pay that went to primarily teachers who were serving in both the virtual world and the face-to-face and had to pull some extra duties. So we paid there. We allocated some for tutoring. We had some additional labor costs and some instructional supplies. We do anticipate these funds will be exhausted in this current fiscal year. So by August 31 of this year, these funds will all be exhausted and we would have used them to the full benefit offsetting the general fund. Now ESSER 3. So as we've said many times, the purpose of this one is to safely reopen schools. So I think we can put a check mark by that. We've done that satisfactorily, but we want to make sure we continue to do that. And the safe operations of schools while addressing the impact on the coronavirus pandemic on students. And this timeline is the one that we have been provided. So the deadline we're working towards right now is that July 27th. We have to make sure we hit submit by that date, and we followed all of these requirements and processes I'm going to talk to you about. And then, of course, we have to do some website postings after that. So here are the requirements. We must spend at least 20% of that $12.8 million on what they call learning loss. So the evidence-based interventions, such as summer learning, extended day, after-school programs, those types of things, and to ensure interventions to respond to our students' academic, social, and emotional needs as a result of this pandemic. So we must spend 20% in that category, and that's not going to be hard to do. We must engage in what's called meaningful consultation, and we must include certain stakeholders and give them the opportunity for them to provide input on the development of this plan. So that's we're currently doing that. We did that. We started this survey, which I'll show you in just a minute, that was put out on June 8th, and it's scheduled to end this week. So if anyone has not completed the survey, it's on our website. We encourage you to do so. And then once this is in place and we receive our notice of grant award, at least every 6 months, we have to seek stakeholder input again, which include teachers, parents, principals, administrators, a number of required stakeholders. We must get their input on the appropriateness, the effectiveness, and revise our plan if needed to ensure that we are addressing the needs of students. So again, I mentioned June 8th, we did that required notification to the public of our intent to apply and how they can provide input, and that's with that survey. We basically ranked how important various parts of various areas are to them to be sure that they're addressed. We posted on the district's website, or we must post on the district's website within 30 days of receiving our notice of grant award. We don't know when that's going to come. If we apply in July, it's probably going to be sometime in August. And so we have to have postings out there on our website. All of these postings on our website is how TEA is going to monitor compliance. I can guarantee you most districts will be audited in some form or fashion, whether it be a desk audit or physical audit. So they're going to help make sure we stay in compliance. So our application will also be on the website for the public and TEA to see. So talking about those uses, through the process of working, because these things could go all the way back to March of 2020, there's some things that we've already committed to do with these ESSER 3 funds. Summer school this year, 2021, we plan on funding with ESSER 3. Looking at a reading cohort leader to help the district through some required reading professional development. Reading Academy stipends, those will go to elementary teachers who have to complete a certification process in reading. We are providing them with some days to do that, but it's not enough. So they're going to be doing a lot of home things as well. So upon completion and proof of that, then a stipend would be paid to help compensate for their time outside. Some counselors at the middle school and intermediate level, 3. Athletic trainers at our middle school. We've seen great success. We did pilot that some with this past spring. And special education, again, art facilitator, and 1 professional position. So those are the things that we've already made some commitments to and planning for next year. Other items for consideration that we'll be working through, and we've gotten some input on, is address that learning loss through more tutoring, summer school beyond 2021, so for 2022 or 2023, software, library materials, other instructional materials that may help students catch up on that learning loss, professional development, assisting with the social and emotional needs of our students and families as a result of the pandemic, reimbursing the general fund for pandemic costs that we've incurred, technology report, and staff retention. Those are some things we're getting input on and we are considering for the future. So to spend a little bit of time on staff retention. So we're seeing more and more of this with districts across the state, but this pandemic had caused a lot of disruption. And, it took every employee group in the district to get through: custodial staff, food service staff, curbside. I think you've seen how much they did. Just the support and the professional development, technology. So across the district, every employee group was very critical in getting through this last year. And they will continue to be critical in the coming years because the burden that pandemic caused, it's not going to be resolved in the summer. So it's going to continue. So it's been shown that retention of staff throughout this process is very essential to providing knowledge and how we got through last year and to provide some consistency for our campuses, our students, and our families. So if we can retain this staff. So one way of addressing that is through retention stipends, and that is allowable. So we've talked about it. This particular stipend, because they said what they've said is eligible in ESSER 3, they've said is also eligible in 1 and 2. 1 is exhausted, so that will not be a resource to us. But as soon as we know what ESSER 2 is, has that shorter spend time, we could use it for either part of that retention stipend if we so choose. So with that, it's anticipated that we would come back in July with specifics on how that retention stipend would be structured and when payment could be made. So where are we in the process? That first section, done. It actually says June 4th, so maybe I was wrong on the other date. It said the 8th. We've done our website postings. We posted in the newspaper. We've done all of that. We're in the process of that middle group. We've identified our required stakeholders as well as others that we want input. We have our budget development team together that will be meeting, and we'll be using input that we got from Success Team, DEIC, cabinet teachers, parents. They reached out to PTO board, some of our principals did, asking them to fill out that survey. I think as of this morning, we had almost 600 responses to our survey. And then we have the application process. We've already downloaded it and we're starting our budget development, but our plans are to submit that in early July. There is how to get to our survey. You can also just log on to the website. It's on the front page. So we encourage anyone to take that if you have not already. And I'll open it up to questions.
School Finance 101.
And 102.
102, 103.
It's like a mini-mester.
Yes, it's a lot. On the funds that you said were already committed, I just had a small question, that list. So the counselors specifically, I mean, were those additional hires of permanent people?
Those will be additional hires. They are posted. So just looking at that, right now the plan is 3, and they would kind of split between their feeder, intermediate, and middle school. That's the plan immediately to give them some additional counseling support. So those are additional FTEs, not supplanting.
Any other questions? Are we just shell-shocked? Fair enough.
Actually, I'll ask one more, sorry.
Oh,
One more. So we have 12, so we're saying it's over $12 million in the ESSER 3, and it's really going to be needing to be spent over the next 3 years, right?
Technically, they've said it expires September 2023, but there is an automatic 1-year extension that would be granted automatically. So really, the effective end date was we would have to spend it all by September 2024.
again, kind of looking at the 3 years, although some of it you said could even kind of backdate it. I guess so. You put the number 3 million on next year's budget, which was less than a third of it. So I guess just kind of what was the thought process on there? Or is it just still not unknown? It's still so unknown at this point?
It's still unknown, and in the budget development, when we looked at before we utilized any of these funds to help us out, it was 5.8 million. So just kind of in looking at that and what College Station ISD has adopted in the past, we felt, like that is an amount that would assist in getting us to something below 3. Of course, when we get better enrollment numbers, and we may have that when we get pre-registrations, we may have it in July, that number could go down.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
There wasn't a scientific methodology there.
All right. Well, thank you, Ms. Strauss.
Thank you.
It's going to take us to D4, consideration discussion regarding Texas Association of School Boards Policy Update 117. Mr. Bartnell.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Ms. Perry is here to review our first reading, TASB Policy Update 117. Again, it's a first reading, so there's no particular action this evening. Ms. Perry?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Martindale. Mr. Nugent, members of the board. This evening, we're going to speak to the Update 117 that TASB has proposed. This information was shared with you all via transmittal. As a reminder, there are about 30 policies impacted by Update 117. However, only 3 of those are local policies that would require board action. You will receive, I think Ms. Hester is going to pass out a copy for you all, the proposed language of those local updates. And I will provide a brief overview of each and, of course, an opportunity for discussion. So the first of those you'll notice in your packet is CH Local. This policy change proposal is related to, sorry about that.
We're already working on that 5.8 million.
We are. We're conserving the copy machine, step 1.
So
Policy CH Local. This is coming out of the major winter storms that we experienced earlier in the late winter, early spring, and the need for many districts, including us here in College Station ISD, to engage in purchases that were an emergency in nature in response to the storm and resulting repairs. And so you'll notice in the packet there is language in there proposing that in the event of an emergency, the superintendent would be authorized to engage in those purchases. Of course, the board would continue to be involved in that process, but it would be an exemption under that very specific instance of an emergency situation. The next policy impacted by the proposed changes is CV Local. This is really not a policy change so much as an adjustment to CV in the event that you all move forward with the proposed recommendations of CH. It would provide an additional note to reference anyone seeking more information over to policy CH Local for more information. The third local policy impacted in a very different way than those of which we've spoken already is DEC Local. And this particular policy is related to employee leaves and absences. So in this policy, TASB's recommendation is that a number of the details in the leaves and absences policy be moved to administrative regulations. In this event, that would be the employee handbook that's published on the website and available for all of our employees to see. They've provided some additional information about the definition of a school year. They have stricken some of that language that's proposed for adjustment over to the employee handbook, and then provided a little bit more clarity around some things related to FMLA and requests for leave, as well as our sick leave pool. You may recall we've done a little bit of work on policy DEC Local over the last several years to make sure that we're providing a lot of high quality benefit to our employees in need. It would not change any of that work. Rather, it would adjust some things over to the handbook versus in board policy. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions? I'm guessing none.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Ms. Perry. All right, with that, wow, just under the wire. With that, we will be adjourned.